Welcome to Character Analysis, the podcast where I play internet detective and armchair psychologist and help you identify red flags, navigate tricky social situations, and where I analyze human behavior in real people and pop culture moments. Today I want to talk about one of my favorite Sex and the City episodes ever. Top 3. The episode is called Critical Condition. It's the one where Carrie is waiting for the review from the New York Times about her new book, Sex and the City. But what the episode is really known for is Facegirl. Before I get into the meat of this issue, make sure you're subscribed because in this week's subscriber-only video, I'm talking about dating influencer Danielle Walter's proposal video. In this video, there are some verbal and behavioral red flags that I want to talk about with you guys. And I also want to go into some signs that you can use or look for when trying to determine if someone's taking advantage of you. Now let's get back to Carrie and Facegirl. This Sex and the City episode opens with Carrie at a cabaret with her friend Stanford because she's meeting Stanford's new boyfriend Marcus for the first time. Carrie's in the bathroom. She overhears two women joking about how there's no straight men at this cabaret show. Carrie comes out of the stall. She's washing her hands, and she turns to the woman next to her and she makes some kind of awkward joke, to which the woman responds with sort of a pity laugh. But then the woman says to Carrie, "You're Carrie Bradshaw. I recognize you from your column." Carrie, thinking she's about to get a compliment, says, "Yeah." And the woman says, "I dated Aiden after you." And then she makes a face and an expression that can only be described as a combination of horror and embarrassment for Carrie. And then she leaves, with Carrie standing there, mouth wide open, not knowing how to respond. There was a lot of meat to this episode. First, you had Carrie getting her ass handed to her more than once by her friends. But the episode also brought up a really interesting topic, which is, what do you do when you find out you're the villain in somebody else's story? Now, I'm not talking about the same situation that I was referring to in last week's episode about charismatic liars. In this episode, I'm talking about perception. There are just some times when we have interactions or experiences with people, and two people walk away with two very, very different reactions or feelings about the interaction. Sometimes the interaction is brief, sometimes it's a little longer, and sometimes it's long-term. But what this episode really brought up is how come, for the most part, we might not care what somebody thinks of us, but there's always those situations that come around where somebody says something to us or just doesn't seem to like us, and it eats at us. What's behind that? I'm going to tag this episode as part of my Then and Now series, which is when I revisit situations from books, movies, TV, and talk about who I sided with then and who I side with now. Because when I first saw this episode, I sided with Carrie. Facegirl, whose real name is Nina, drops this bomb in Carrie's lap, provides no context, and leaves. And she has a friend with her who sort of adds a kind of an unspoken backup. So it kind of feels like 2 against 1. And she doesn't just do this once, because Carrie continues to run into this person, one time by accident, one time because she's semi-stalking her. The second time Carrie runs into Facegirl's with someone from Vogue. And we all know how important Vogue is to Carrie. She even writes for that magazine at one point. Carrie realizes that Samantha knows Nina, and they have a quick interaction. And Nina or Carrie said something like, "We've met before." And the woman from Vogue says, "Oh, how do you two know each other?" And Nina says, in a kind of, not a slightly snarky tone, "I'll tell you later," which is just going to make Carrie's paranoia that much more intense. Now, Carrie being Carrie, of course, this is going to take her already pre-existing self-absorption and kick it up to 11. She's having all kinds of conversations with her friends about their mini crises going on in their lives. And every single time she brings the conversation back to her. And we've all had that friend. I'm sure a lot of us have even done that. But while she's going on and on and on to Miranda about Facegirl, Miranda's literally falling asleep because she's a new mom. She's got maybe an hour's sleep, and her baby has been crying a lot, and she doesn't know why. Now, I love this subplot because it was a great parallel to Carrie's experience with Facegirl. here's Miranda, the baby's crying, the baby can't communicate, and she doesn't know what's wrong. She just hears the baby crying, which she immediately takes to mean, as any new mother would, something's wrong. But not just something's wrong, she's doing something wrong. And that was what was bothering Miranda so much about Brady's crying. And she eventually says this, I think, she says it to Carrie on the phone. She equates Brady's crying, her son Brady, she equates that crying with, I'm a bad mother, which of course she wasn't. But there was clearly something going on inside Miranda that was making her leap to this conclusion. Now, the audience watching knows that Miranda's doing a great job. She's essentially a single mother. She's working a full-time job. She's doing everything she can to make sure she provides a good life for her son. And that's really all you can, I won't say it's all you can ask of a good parent, but it's one of the main things. But Miranda, even though she's working this full-time job as a lawyer and then she's coming home and she's taking care of her son, she's doing everything, she still feels like she's failing. Now, I think a lot of that has to do with just being a woman. I think that kind of perfectionism is put on women, especially when it comes to raising our kids or our marriage with our partner or a relationship with a partner. The responsibility is often, if not always, put on the woman to nurture and maintain these relationships and make sure that the relationships are healthy and productive and successful. So Miranda can't help but feel guilt, right? Guilt and shame. Those are two emotions often weaponized against women. So it makes sense that Brady's persistent crying is going to bother Miranda, even though Miranda knows on a very conscious level, I'm doing the best I can. And actually, she's excelling at it, in my opinion. So Carrie is on the phone with Miranda while Miranda is kind of going through this really serious emotional crisis. Not that Carrie's wasn't, but I felt as though Carrie really wasn't taking what Miranda was going through very seriously because it's Carrie, and Carrie isn't great with empathy. And Carrie's going on and on and on. And finally, Miranda just snaps and says, you know what, Carrie, why don't you call Samantha? She has all kinds of time to listen to you talk about this. And to her credit, Carrie says, can I do anything? Later on, during a conversation with Samantha, Carrie wonders out loud, why is this bothering me so much? Why is it bothering me that Facegirl might possibly have a certain impression of me that isn't accurate? I would have loved to have seen the writers push Carrie just a little bit more here, because if Carrie had done a little bit more introspection, and I wish they did it with, I think they did it with Miranda, right? Because Miranda says out loud, I'm a terrible mother. She voices, I think, what her real fear is. But had Carrie just really sort of followed that feeling through a bit, I think she would have landed on the fact that what's really bothering her is, what if this reaction that Facegirl had, what if this impression this Facegirl had about her because of what Aiden told her is true? And that's what I mean by finding out you're the villain in somebody else's story. My personal opinion, Aiden was incredibly toxic when they got together after their first breakup. He obviously didn't trust her, and he was pushing and pushing and pushing her to do what he wanted to do, to the point where he was almost trapping her. Meanwhile, Carrie is struggling with her intimacy issues that she doesn't really deal with ever. And she knows on some level, like her behavior, she's literally breaking out in hives when she tries on a wedding dress. She has all these signs telling her, this is not the person you want to marry. So Carrie isn't innocent either, obviously. What's interesting, though, is Carrie seems stunned at the thought, or at the idea, that Aiden might not see her in a positive light. That Aiden might not see what she considered effort in trying to make that relationship work. She seems almost surprised that Aiden might be bad-mouthing her, or worse, because she finds this out from Steve, she's really surprised to hear that for a month after the breakup, he just wasn't in a good place. Most people in that situation would probably say, "Oh, yeah, I could kinda understand why he sees things that way." Carrie's really gobsmacked by how she's really surprised that Aiden might not have taken their breakup well. Later on in the episode, she runs into Facegirl again, and this time it's when she's with Stanford. Now, she's of course going on and on and on about Facegirl and telling him to be on the lookout for her because Carrie overheard her say she goes to this specific market on weekends. Stanford asks her for her opinion of Marcus, his new boyfriend. And Carrie says, nice. Stanford finally has enough and says, no. I've been listening to you go on about Aiden for the past 10 blocks in the past 2 years. I finally find somebody that I really like, and the best you can say is nice. So we have two people in this episode saying to Carrie, hey, girl, not everything's about you. Carrie finally runs into Facegirl, and Facegirl is with Heather Graham now, who at the time was sort of like a kind of an A-list actor. Facegirl introduces Carrie to Heather Graham, and she says, this is Carrie Bradshaw. And Heather Graham goes, ooh, Carrie, and makes the face. So Carrie, in my opinion, justifiably takes Nina aside and says, listen, this breakups are awful, and they're not representative of how two people felt about each other. And she says, and they're private. But she says to Nina, I would never do anything to intentionally hurt Aiden. Ma'am, we were all there when you cheated on Aiden multiple times. So again, we're seeing that total lack of self-awareness in Carrie. Nina just smiles and she says, okay. And she's not upset and she's not offended. And Carrie's, again, left there kind of like, that's not the response I was expecting. And the voiceover comes on and says something kind of trite like, the only reviews that actually matter are the ones you give yourself. Maybe. I don't know if I agree with that. Now, I don't know about anybody watching, but I know I've been in Carrie's shoes. I know that I've been in situations where I've found out that people that I didn't really know very well, or maybe someone that I did know well, was telling people something or had an impression of our relationship that I didn't see as accurate. And there have been times when I've met somebody or interact with somebody that I am just meeting for the first time and just felt a vibe like, why don't they seem to like me? Now, in my case, I have ADHD, so I suffer from something called rejection sensitivity dysphoria. An example would be I send a text to my friend and I don't hear from her for a couple of days and I think something's wrong or they're mad at me. But really, they saw the text and they forgot to respond. I make all these scenarios up in my head thinking that this vibe that I'm picking up on has something to do with, did I do something wrong? And 90% of the time, it's my RSD. It's my rejection sensitive dysphoria. But there are those occasions when I walk away from a situation and I find out, somebody had a certain impression, or I engage with somebody and they're just not, we're just not vibing. And I walk away and I examine it and I think, oh, I wonder if I said this and maybe that turned them off, or maybe there's just something going on with them. Maybe they have an experience that I'm unaware of and I said something unintentionally that made them uncomfortable or triggered them. But it can be really hard not to spiral out in those moments, even if you don't struggle with RSD. I tend to think that when something eats at us, like really bothers us, it's something that's hard for us to let go, there's a deeper reason for it. Carrie, of course, she wasn't going to dig. I think Carrie just wasn't in a place, and I don't know if she ever got to the place where she had the tools emotionally to really look into why she was the way she was. We saw it in an episode where she was working at Vogue, and the guy, the one who was calling her Cookie, he brought up her father leaving, and he says, "Oh, well, now everything makes sense. You have abandonment issues." You have intimacy issues. I would have loved to have seen Carrie work through that, maybe with a therapist, maybe on her own. I don't know. And just like that, season 4, Carrie goes to therapy. Michael King, call me. It's not it's not always easy to follow that feeling through. It's scary. When you find yourself in a situation like this, the first thing you want to do is normalize it. Don't judge yourself for having this feeling because all of our feelings are valid. They might not be based in fact, but they are our feelings and that makes them valid. Whatever it is you're feeling, it's your intuition, right? It's your intuition. It's your subconscious mind trying to tell you something. The problem comes when we misinterpret that vibe, that intuition. Remember, our intuition it's our subconscious mind picking up on patterns and cues and processing that information at such a fast rate of speed that our conscious mind isn't able to identify or interpret them in the moment. That's why you want to give it time, right? You don't want to have an immediate reaction. You don't want to call this out or even bring it up in the moment. We assume that when our intuition is trying to tell us something that it's usually danger, and that's not the case. Once you've grounded yourself a bit, ask yourself, what actually happened here? What about that interaction triggered something in me? Was it a tone shift? Did they go quiet at one point? Or was it a Facegirl moment where they gave you a look that you couldn't interpret? In these moments, what we're dealing with is observation versus interpretation. So you want to make sure these two things are aligned. The next thing you're going to want to do is really hone in on what am I feeling right now? How do I feel like they reacted to me? Do I feel like they were cold or distant? Were they rude? Were they snarky? Identify that feeling. And what I want you to pay attention to most is how much of it was their behavior towards you versus how you were interpreting it, right? The observation versus the interpretation. Did something they do make you feel X, Y, or Z? When my friend took a couple days to respond to me, I felt anxious. I felt concerned. But I also felt like, oh, did I do something wrong? I felt guilty. Now, when I pulled back from that and I acknowledged, well, we've talked every day up until then, and I go back to the text messages and our conversation seems normal and her reactions don't seem to have any sort of tone to them. I don't have anything to feel guilty about. And that's when I say to myself, you might be reading something into this that isn't there. And then I go through all the possible reasons why I didn't hear from her. Maybe there's no signal where she is. Maybe she's busy. Maybe she forgot. Maybe I asked her a question or said something that she wanted to give thought to. Or maybe she is upset with me. Maybe I did do something that bothered her. And when I hit on that, what I always tell myself is, but we've got a really solid friendship and she knows me, she knows who I am, and I know who she is. So if that's the case, I know we're going to be able to resolve it. And that's something you can tell yourself if this interaction is with a stranger. Maybe you did do something that was a little off-putting. That's when you tell yourself, I know who I am. I know I would never intentionally try to hurt somebody's feeling or make them uncomfortable. The most difficult aspect of a situation like this, when you get a vibe from somebody or you get the sense that someone doesn't like you and you don't know why, the hardest part of it is the rumination because sometimes you just can't let go of it. It just sort of rolls around in your head over and over and over again. Now, it's easy to let it go, or you let it go a little quicker when it's someone you don't think you're going to see again, that you don't have any sort of mutuals with or connection to. But when it's somebody where there's some like mutual friendships or mutual connections, or somebody that you see with some kind of regularity, it's a little bit harder. And we tend to go in one of two directions when that rumination starts. We either push it away because it's just too uncomfortable, which is what Carrie did, or we just propel ourselves down a rabbit hole and we buy into and validate every negative thought we have about ourselves. When what we need to do is start collecting data. And that's what we often fail to ask ourselves. Is there enough data here for me to have taken or for me to have this impression? And this is where objectivity is so important, because if you revisit the scenario and you review it, ask yourself, okay, How many times did I notice this? How many times did I feel this? What made me feel this way? And if it's somebody that you see with regularity, that way now you have something to compare it to. Is this something that happens all the time or was it a one off? And how do they interact with other people? And and what's their relationship? Like how long did it take them to warm up to somebody? Or were they just immediately warm to them but not to me? You need data to get to the conclusion. Get a sense of them outside of the interaction with you, if that's possible. That might not be possible. But understand that you might never get resolution here. See, and that's the thing with closure. Closure requires some kind of validation from somebody else. What you're looking for here is clarity, and clarity is something you can do for yourself, and it's far more empowering. So, my advice is instead of trying to figure them out, spend the time trying to figure out why this bothers you. Sit with that feeling, as uncomfortable as it might get, as long as you feel safe, right? As long as it's not going to be too triggering for you. Talk about it with a friend or someone who can be objective, someone who could say, you know what? No, I know you, or I know people who have met you and have said you were great. Talk about it with somebody who can look at you objectively. And then maybe after hearing them tell you how amazing you are, it's not going to matter what this semi stranger thinks of you. Or they're going to kind of go on this journey with you, which is a little less scary, and help you get to that place where you go, oh, that's why this bothers me. Because when I was in high school, it was hard for me to make friends and I was teased a lot. Or this is triggering my need for validation or even my fear of abandonment. What wound has been activated by this interaction? That's far more productive, in my opinion, because it's going to help you build your self awareness, probably help you build your resilience to social interactions like this. And it will make it that much easier to do that kind of introspection going forward. Now, I said in the beginning of this episode that this was going to be part of my Then and Now series. And I said earlier that I sided with Carrie when I first saw this episode. And I still do, because as irritating and toxic as Carrie was, I think she was justified to be bothered by what Nina was doing, because Nina was dropping these bombs and she wasn't sticking around to deal with the repercussions. She was just putting it out there and letting Carrie sit with it without providing any kind of clarity or information. On top of that, she was making these insinuations, these little side comments in the multiple interactions that she had with Carrie. And they weren't even discreet. She wasn't even trying to be discreet. And Carrie was picking up on every single one of them. Most importantly, they had mutuals, including at Vogue. That was Carrie's professional reputation now that could be potentially affected by this gossip. And that's what it was, right? Because she's talking to Steve, she's talking to Steve Graham, she's talking to her friends. Nina liked the tea, like a lot of us. Who doesn't love the tea? But we're adults and we know it's probably not the nicest or the most socially appropriate thing to do to tell other people's stories. So if you do it and you get caught at it or called out about it, then be mature enough and have the character to take responsibility. Nina didn't do that. I give Carrie credit for approaching her. Granted, she was stalking her to find her at that pretzel stand or whatever. But I think it took a lot of guts for Carrie to approach her and say, listen, I know you're saying all these things. It's getting back to me. And our relationship was ours. It's private. A decent person in that situation, in my opinion, would have said, I totally hear you and I'm sorry. And Nina just stood there, hands in her pockets, and just shrugged. Okay, that's it. That's all she said. I think the only person whose opinion Carrie should have cared about in that situation was Aiden's. And I'm not saying she should have gone above and beyond here because, like I said, I think Aiden was toxic. But I do think that she treated him poorly. In that situation, I think it was best that she didn't approach Aiden to ask him what he was saying and, hey, let's get some clarity here, because I think it would have just completely reopened a wound. But sometimes it can make you feel better to go to this person and say, hey, can we work this out? if only because I think it's important to take responsibility when we treat somebody poorly. Not just because of karma, but because of how healing that can be for somebody else. Because we know how healing that can be for us. You just have to really prepare yourself for potentially not getting the best response. They might not want to have anything to do with you, and that's their right, and that's okay. And you have to come to terms with that. You have to come to terms with the fact that you might never get an answer to this. You might never get a resolution. And that's why it's so important to, I think, focus this inward and figure out why it bothers you and work on that and heal that. And then if you feel as though you truly might owe somebody an apology, give it to them with the understanding they might not accept it, or they might, but it's the right thing to do. And I think it could go a long way in somebody's healing, including your own. Thank you so much for listening. I'm really enjoying doing this sort of format switch and talking a little bit deeper about red flags and interpersonal interactions and things like that because it's my wheelhouse. Thank you for sticking around. I'm so excited at all the people who subscribed over the last couple of weeks because it's really rejuvenated me and given me the boost of confidence that I needed to keep going. Remember, become a subscriber so you can listen to the bonus episode about dating influencer Danielle Walter's proposal video and the behavioral and verbal red flags. And we're going to talk about how do you know if you're dealing with somebody in your life, whether it's a friend or a romantic partner, that doesn't have the best intentions and is taking advantage of you. Also, make sure you're following me on social media at My Character Analysis on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. Now, I've done a little housekeeping and I've sort of separated out my content. I have a Substack strictly for the true crime content, and it's mycharacteranalysis.substack.com, and it's character analysis, true crime. I'm like Law and Order. I'm franchising. This Substack is more about red flags, human behavior, pop culture, internet drama. And if you're somebody who does want to work on their self-awareness and their growth, go over to my Amazon storefront and check out the journals. I've curated a bunch of journals that I use personally that I find are very non-intimidating and really help me sort of track my moods and track my growth. I'll link to my storefront in the episode description. Thank you for being here, and I'll talk to you guys soon.